There is a house of tragedy, murder, and hauntings, deep in the hills. Why, Beverly Hills, that is. On the little street of Easton Drive, off of Benedict Canyon Drive, sits a cozy little cottage that looks like it came straight out of a fairy tale, and it's known as the Harlow House. And why is it named that, you ask? Because it was the home of Hollywood legend Jean Harlow and her husband, producer Paul Bern. But who cares about him? Because it's Jean Harlow's house. The Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow was the original blonde bombshell. Do you hear that, Marilyn? The original. And she was the biggest star of 1930s Hollywood. Jean Harlow had her big break in 1929 when she was cast by the Howard Hughes in his film Hell's Angels. And it was during this film shoot that she met her future husband, Paul Burns. And at the time, he was a big-time producer at MGM. And he was responsible for MGM buying Jean Harlow's contract off of Howard Hughes for $30,000. $30,000 in 1930s money. I think he liked her. So Paul Burns came from a family of Jewish immigrants who escaped Germany. He grew up in New York City with dreams of becoming an actor, but he didn't have the talent for it, so he got into theater production instead. And tragically, around this time in his life, his mother, Henriette, drowned herself, and I want you to remember that detail. So Paul had a common-law wife that he lived with, and her name was Dorothy Millette. They got together in 1911, but Dorothy had a lot of mental illness problems, and because Paul financially supported her, he put her into an asylum in Connecticut, because you could just do that back then. Now flash forward back to when he meets Jean Harlow. They end up getting married on July 2nd, 1932, and they move into this beautiful cottage together. Now, like a lot of fairy tale Hollywood marriages, this ended horribly, because just 2 months after they got married, Paul Burns unalived himself. On September 5th, 1932, he was found dead inside the house with a bullet wound through the head. Now, the maid is the one who found Paul, and instead of calling the police, she called MGM Studios instead. So MGM's highest executive is the one that came to the house first. And apparently hours and hours went by before the authorities were finally called to the house. And this, of course, led to many conspiracy theories about the death of Paul Burns. Now, Paul did leave a cryptic note that read, "Dearest dear, unfortunately, this is the only way to make good on the frightful wrong I have done you and wipe out my abject humiliation. I love you, Paul. You understand that last night was only a comedy." What the hell does that mean? Why is everyone so dramatic in Hollywood? So, the night before Paul was found deceased, it was found out that his common-law wife, Dorothy, had come to visit him, and Jean Harlow was conveniently not at home that night, or the day he was found deceased. She had been at MGM Studios working and was notified about his death there. So while the coroner's official report states that Paul died from a self-inflicted wound in the head, it was the studio who did him dirty in the end. They claimed that Paul offed himself because of his impotence and that he couldn't please his young, beautiful wife. Ouch. And now the other theory surrounding Paul's death is that Dorothy did it, because she was still technically his common-law wife. And the night before Paul's death, the maid did see a woman come to visit Paul. And the next day, they found a woman's bathing suit there, one that reportedly did not fit Jean Harlow. So people theorized that Dorothy killed Paul in a jealous rage for locking her away in a mental institution and then marrying a big, beautiful movie star. Now the candle on top of this big, bloody, messy cake is that 2 days after Paul's death, Dorothy was also found dead. She had drowned herself in the Sacramento River. And if you remember, that's what happened to Paul's mother. Weird. Now, Harlow was also under suspicion for Paul's death. But again, she had a solid alibi because she was working at the studio. You know, the same studio that were the first ones called onto the scene of Paul's death and didn't call the authority for hours. But that didn't stop Harlow from becoming a huge star over the next 5 years. MGM wasn't going to lose that investment over a teeny scandal. But in 1937, at the age of 26, Jean Harlow died of kidney failure. that was most likely caused by kidney damage that happened to her as a teenager when she contracted scarlet fever. Okay, this is where it gets interesting, kids. Yes, more interesting than the story I just told you. In 1963, the house was bought by Hollywood hairstylist Jay Sebring. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? And a year later, Jay's new girlfriend moved into the house with him, and her name was Sharon Tate. Yeah. And as Hollywood legend goes, she had a very disturbing experience there that some think was a premonition of her and Jay's eventual fate. So the story goes that one night Sharon was alone in the house. She woke in the middle of the night with an uneasy feeling, and then saw the apparition of a man in her room. And the description that she gave of this man led people to believe that it was the apparition of Paul Burns. So terrified, she ran out of the room and down the stairs. And that's where she saw the figure of someone tied to the banister of the stairs, with their throat. So she ran back upstairs and hid in her room for the rest of the night. And just a few short years later, on August 8, 1969, Jay Sebring and Sharon Tate were murdered by the Manson family cult in Tate's home in CeeLo Drive that she shared with then-husband Roman Polanski. So many people believe that Sharon had a premonition about her and Jay's horrific fate while she was living in the Harlow house, and that the ghost of Paul Burns had come to warn her. Now, her friends and family have vehemently denied the story ever happened, but it is one of the many tragic Hollywood legends. Jay Sebring's parents ended up selling the Harlow house in 1970, and none of the owners since have claimed to have any paranormal experiences. So while Hollywood is a place where many people go to live out their wildest dreams, there have been so many that have ended in tragedy.